I never expected that a quiet train ride between cities would stir something so deeply inside me. I thought I was just escaping for a few days from pressure, from people, from my own restless thoughts. But the moment I looked up from my coffee and saw him settling into the seat across from mine, I knew this journey was going to be different. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a look, a pause too long, a flicker of something unspoken. The train was already humming as it pulled out of Vienna's Hauptbahnhof, slicing through the early morning chill with the promise of a slow, scenic ride toward Prague. I'd booked a window seat in the quiet carriage, craving solitude, some hours to breathe. After back-to-back projects and too many city nights that blurred together, I needed space to think, to be still, to maybe feel something again. My camera sat tucked in its worn leather case at my feet, untouched since Budapest. Even the spark of inspiration had dimmed lately. Then he stepped into the compartment. Tall, wrapped in a gray wool coat, with hair the color of sand and eyes that looked like they hadn't properly slept in days. He moved with the ease of someone used to long travel, a duffel slung over one shoulder, coffee in the other hand, blazer poking out from under his coat. When he glanced at me, something lingered in the air like a note that hadn't fully resolved. "Mind if I sit here?" His German accent was soft, careful. I shook my head. "Of course." He gave a polite smile and settled into the seat opposite mine, placing his bag by the window. We were close, knees nearly touching under the small table, the scent of fresh espresso floating between us. For a while, we said nothing, just exchanged brief, awkward glances as the train rocked us gently toward open countryside. I pretended to read. He scrolled through his phone, answering emails, his fingers tapping rhythmically. Eventually, it was the coffee that broke the silence. "I'm Luca," I said, raising my cup slightly. He looked up, surprised but not unpleasantly so. "Elias." "Architect," he added with a sheepish smile, then gestured at his phone. "Heading to Prague for a client pitch." "Photographer," I replied, tapping the case by my feet. "No clients. Just trying to remember why I started loving it in the first place." He chuckled softly. "Prague might help with that." There was something about his voice, quiet but rich, a low rumble that made even small talk feel personal. We started slow, letting the conversation rise and fall between sips. The countryside slipped by like watercolor, hills, frozen fields, patches of sleepy villages blurred in the distance. And inside the compartment, time softened. We spoke about everything and nothing, travel, tiredness, that strange middle space where people our age often found themselves. He told me about Berlin, the loneliness of clean apartments and silent nights. I told him about Rome and how it always felt too loud unless you were in love. At some point, he pulled out a pair of headphones. "You mind?" he asked, holding out one of the earbuds. I didn't even hesitate. We sat there, shoulder to shoulder now, listening to the same playlist, soft guitar, a bit of jazz, something electronic and slow. His knee bumped mine and didn't move away. I watched the reflection of his face in the window. Calm, tired, beautiful in a quiet, human way. By the time the train reached the Czech border, something had shifted. The air between us felt different, heavier, warmer. We weren't speaking, not really, but our arms were touching beneath the blanket he had pulled from his bag, and I could feel the curve of his knuckle brushing mine every time the train jolted. And I didn't move away. Neither did he. There was a moment somewhere between Brno and a nameless town where the sky turned a shade darker when I realized I hadn't checked the time in over an hour. That never happened to me. I was always watching the clock, measuring my days in projects, minutes, connections, but something about sitting beside Elias, half under a blanket, sharing music and silence, made time stretch and blur in the best possible way. He had taken off his coat. His shirt was pale blue, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing strong forearms and the kind of veins that artists like me always wanted to photograph. Every few minutes, he glanced at me, not in a shy or flirty way, but like he was reading something behind my eyes. And maybe he was. "How long are you staying in Prague?" he asked eventually. 3 days, I said, then shrugged. "Unless I decide to disappear longer." He tilted his head with a quiet smile. "You came to disappear?" "Maybe," I admitted. "Or to find something I didn't know I was missing." He nodded slowly. "That sounds familiar." He didn't explain what he meant, and I didn't press him. Instead, we watched as the landscape shifted again, bare trees lining the tracks like crooked sentinels, the fields dusted with frost. His hand was now resting palm up between us, open, relaxed. I looked at it for a while before letting my fingers graze his. Just once. But he didn't pull away. He turned his hand gently, lacing our fingers together. Neither of us spoke. It felt right. Like we weren't crossing a line, but finally stepping into something we had both quietly been circling. There was no performance, no teasing. Just warmth and presence and the press of his thumb against mine like he was reminding me he was real. "I don't usually do this," he said quietly. "Me neither." Another truth. There was nothing routine about this, not the timing, not the setting, and certainly not the feeling blooming somewhere beneath my ribs. The announcement for Prague came over the speakers and we both startled slightly. I had forgotten we were going anywhere at all. He let go of my hand to stretch, his fingers brushing the back of my neck on the way up, and the touch lingered long after. "You have a hotel booked?" he asked as we gathered our things. "Not yet," I replied, realizing how aimless my trip had started. I was going to wander until something felt right. He hesitated. "I know a place. Small boutique spot near Old Town. I've stayed there before." I looked at him. "You want to check it out together?" he added, not quite meeting my eyes this time. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'd like that." We stepped off the train just after sunset, the sky bleeding amber behind the city skyline. Prague was colder than Vienna had been, but I hardly noticed. The platform was crowded, but we moved in sync, our bags swinging at our sides, and something in me felt lighter than it had in months. A city I'd barely seen was already beginning to mean something more. We walked through the dim streets of Prague like we'd done it before, like this wasn't our first night together in a new place. The air was brisk but not biting, and the cobblestones gleamed under street lamps, the echoes of our footsteps overlapping like a shared rhythm. Hey, thanks for watching until this point. Please leave a comment if you're enjoying the video. It really helps us grow the channel and reach more people. And hey, thank you very much. Let's get back to story. He led the way, not with urgency, but with a quiet kind of confidence, as if he already knew I'd follow. The hotel was tucked away on a narrow street behind a quiet square, its facade lit softly, ivy climbing up one side of the doorway. Inside, the lobby was warm and quiet, the kind of space that smelled like books and old wood. Elias spoke to the receptionist in soft Czech, just a few phrases, and turned to me with a smile that made my stomach twist slightly. "They've got 2 rooms," he said, voice even. "Or just one with 2 beds." I met his gaze. "One's fine." His smile shifted. "Smaller. Warmer. Like something settled between us." Upstairs, the room had tall windows, soft yellow walls, and 2 beds pressed side by side with a small nightstand between them. A vase of wildflowers sat beneath the window, and you could just hear the city if you left the glass cracked open, the sound of Prague breathing in its sleep. We didn't say much for a while. We unpacked quietly, changed clothes, made a little space for ourselves in this borrowed moment. "I'm starving," he said eventually, tossing his jacket over a chair. I looked up. Same. We found a tiny cafe down the street that was still open, serving late bowls of soup and warm bread with melted cheese. The table was too small, our knees touching again under the wood. The light was low, the candles real, and we laughed more than we talked, about our worst travel mistakes, old roommates, the horror of airport food, and how exhausting it was to pretend we always had it all together. At one point, he reached over and gently wiped a smear of cheese from my cheek with his thumb. His hand lingered a second too long. I didn't stop him. Back in the hotel room, we stood by the window, drinking tea and watching the empty street. It was well past midnight, but neither of us made a move to say goodnight. I turned to him slowly. "Do you regret inviting me here?" His brow furrowed. "What?" "No. Not even for a second." There was a silence. But it wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken thoughts, of the awareness between us that had only been growing since that first glance on the train. He took a step closer. His fingers brushed mine. And when he leaned in, his lips just inches from mine, I didn't move away. The moment his lips touched mine, something in me exhaled, something I hadn't realized I'd been holding in for a very long time. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, like we were both still waiting for a sign that this wasn't a dream. But then he leaned in further, his hand rising to cradle my cheek, and everything shifted. I kissed him back, fully, without thinking, without questioning what it meant, because in that moment it just felt right. The night outside was quiet, the distant city muffled behind tall glass and old stone. But inside our small hotel room, everything felt electric. His lips moved with intention, not rushed, not forceful, but full of quiet hunger, like he'd been waiting to taste me since Vienna, and now that he had, he wasn't ready to stop. I felt his fingers thread gently through my hair, the warmth of his palm against my skin. My own hands rested on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath beneath his shirt. When we finally paused, just for air, he stayed close, his forehead against mine, eyes still closed. "I didn't think this would happen," he whispered. I did, I said, half smiling. Somewhere between Brno and the border. That made him laugh softly, and it felt so good to hear it. Like something unguarded had finally cracked open. He reached for my hand and led me to the bed closest to the window. We sat down side by side, still close, still unsure what came next, but neither of us moved away. He leaned in again, his mouth finding mine with more urgency this time, our bodies slowly adjusting, leaning, touching, testing every inch of space between us. He took his time, exploring my jawline with his lips, kissing down the side of my neck, pausing when he felt my breath hitch. I pulled him closer, my arms around his waist, feeling the shape of him under the layers, warm, lean, solid. His scent, clean and earthy with the faintest hint of cologne, made my head feel light. When I reached to unbutton his shirt, he looked into my eyes and didn't say a word. He just nodded, slow and sure. It wasn't just about sex, though the desire between us was impossible to ignore. It was about closeness, about understanding something without needing to say it aloud. About letting someone in fully for the first time in a long time. He helped me out of my shirt, his hands slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving mine. I ran my fingers along his ribs, down his back, memorizing the way he tensed and softened under my touch. Each gesture was quiet permission. Each sigh was a wordless yes. We moved together like the train we met on, slow, deliberate, gliding towards something inevitable. We kissed until our mouths ached, touched until every inch of skin between us was mapped and claimed. When our bodies finally sank down into the sheets, tangled and warm, it wasn't lust that stayed with me most. It was how safe I felt. How seen. How wanted. Later, long after the heat between us had calmed and we lay wrapped in the same blanket, Elias brushed his fingers over my collarbone and said quietly, "That didn't feel like just a night." I turned toward him, heart still heavy in my chest. "No," I said. "It didn't." We didn't need to say more. The window was still cracked, and through it Prague whispered softly, old and quiet and full of stories. Ours had just begun. The light through the window came in soft and golden, slipping between the curtains and casting long shapes across the sheets. For a moment, I didn't move. I just lay there, warm beneath the blanket, listening to the subtle rhythm of Elias's breath beside me, steady, deep, peaceful. The kind of sleep you only fall into when your body is exhausted and your heart finally feels quiet. I turned my head slowly, careful not to wake him, and took in the sight of him half asleep, his hair tousled, his lips slightly parted, one arm draped over the pillow where my chest had been earlier. There was something boyish in the way he slept, something soft and honest, and I couldn't help the small smile that formed on my face. I didn't expect to feel this calm. Or this full. Eventually, he stirred, blinking against the light, and when he found my eyes on him, he smiled. Just a simple, sleepy smile, but it made my chest ache a little. "Morning," he said, voice low and rough. "Hey," I replied. We didn't rush to get up. There was no awkwardness, no scrambling for clothes or polite goodbyes. Just the slow realization that whatever had happened between us last night hadn't lost its weight in the light of day. After a while, we made our way to the cafe downstairs, tucked into a quiet corner with coffee and toasted pastries. Elias sipped slowly, occasionally reaching across the table to tap my fingers like he was checking if I was still real. I was doing the same, replaying every moment from the train to the room, wondering how it had happened so fast and yet felt so natural. "I have my meeting this afternoon," he said quietly, tracing the rim of his cup. "Just for an hour or two." I nodded. "Want to meet after?" He looked up, something sparking in his expression. "You'd wait." "I want to," I said simply. He reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it, his thumb brushing my knuckle. "Then I'll come find you." And he did. That afternoon, we walked Prague like locals, no itinerary, no maps. Just hands brushing as we wandered through stone alleys, old bridges, and plazas filled with musicians and laughter. He told me about growing up in Hamburg, about his love for quiet spaces, for buildings that breathed with history. I told him about photography, how I chased light and emotion more than anything else, how sometimes the best shots came when you stopped trying. We ducked into galleries, bookstores, stood too long in front of fountains. The day faded slowly, one golden hour stretching into the next, until we were back at the hotel, side by side, leaning on the same pillow, shoulders touching. There wasn't a moment when we asked what this was. It didn't need to be defined. It was something we were already living. And I hadn't felt anything like it in years. Our last morning in Prague arrived too quickly. The city was just waking up, cobbled streets still quiet, shops only beginning to roll up their gates. Elias and I stood by the hotel window, coffee in hand, wrapped in one of the heavy blankets from the bed. We hadn't talked much after waking up. It wasn't that we didn't have anything to say, it was that we both knew this moment was borrowed time. "I don't want to leave," he said, breaking the silence, his voice barely more than a breath. I looked at him, his profile sharp against the glow of morning. "Then don't," I said, only half joking. He turned to me, his expression soft. "I have to. So do you." And he was right. My train was at noon. His flight left an hour later. Reality was gently but insistently tapping on the door. Still, we dragged it out. Packed slowly. Walked to the station like we had nowhere to be. Took one last detour to a quiet bench in a hidden courtyard just off the main square. There, with pigeons fluttering nearby and the faint sound of a violin somewhere in the distance, he rested his head against my shoulder. "I didn't expect this," he murmured. "You. Us. Neither did I." He shifted slightly, so we were face to face. "But I want more." I swallowed. "Me too." He leaned in then and kissed me, not rushed, not heavy, just a slow, lingering kiss that felt like a promise. Like something unfinished, yet already meaningful. At the platform, we stood close as my train approached. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic goodbyes. Just a final hug that lingered far too long, his lips brushing my ear as he whispered, "This isn't the end." And somehow I believed him. We stayed in touch, of course. Messages at first, late-night check-ins, little jokes about travel delays, photos of sunsets we thought the other would like. Then video calls. Conversations that lasted too long, drifting from casual to vulnerable. And soon, a plan. 2 months later, Elias met me in Florence. He looked different there, tanned from the sun, wearing linen, more relaxed. But when he smiled at me in the arrivals hall, I knew nothing important had changed. That night, we sat by the Arno eating gelato, knees brushing as we watched the streetlights shimmer on the river's surface. He turned to me and said, "You know the train ride?" That moment we sat down across from each other. "Yeah," I said, smiling. I think that was the beginning of something that might actually matter. And as I leaned into his side, resting my head on his shoulder, I realized something simple and quietly profound. He was right. Some stories don't begin with fireworks or certainty. Some begin on a train, with two tired men, a quiet laugh, and a spark that refuses to burn out.